What most people misunderstand about forgiveness is that it was never meant to protect the person who hurt you. It was meant to free the person they hurt. But somewhere along the way, that truth got twisted. Society started using forgiveness as a weapon against victims. Just let it go. Be the bigger person. Forgive and forget. And slowly, quietly, you were trained to swallow your pain and hand power back to the very people who took it from you. Here's what nobody tells you. There is a category of disrespect so deliberate, so calculated, so deeply personal that forgiving it doesn't heal you. It teaches the other person exactly how far they can go before you do nothing about it. Forgiveness has a place, but not every act deserves it. Some acts are not mistakes, they are choices. Repeated, conscious, targeted choices designed to diminish who you are. Today, we're talking about 7 of those acts, not to breed bitterness, not to build walls, but to give you something most people never received growing up: permission to protect yourself. Because the moment you stop forgiving what should never be forgiven is the moment you start becoming someone no one will ever disrespect again. Let's talk about one of the most misused words in human: interaction, honesty. Because somewhere in your life, someone hurt you. They said something cutting, something cruel, something that landed in your chest like a stone. And before you could even process the pain, before you could even catch your breath, they looked at you and said those 4 words that changed everything: "I'm just being honest." And you froze. Because what do you do with that? How do you respond to someone who just wrapped a knife in a ribbon and called it a gift? That is what public humiliation disguised as honesty looks like. And it is one of the most psychologically sophisticated forms of disrespect that exists, because it gives the person hurting you a shield. The moment they say, "I'm just telling the truth," suddenly you're the problem. You're too sensitive. You can't handle reality. You need to grow thicker skin. And while you're busy defending your reaction, they walk away clean, untouchable, even admirable in some circles for being so real. But let's slow this down. Let's actually look at what happened. Real honesty, genuine, caring honesty, has a purpose. It exists to help someone. It exists to build something, to correct something, to move someone forward. Real honesty considers the timing. It considers the setting. It considers how the words will land and whether the person receiving them will be able to do something useful with what they're hearing. Real honesty is private when it needs to be private. It's gentle when gentleness is what will actually work. And above all, real honesty respects the dignity of the person it's being delivered to. What we're talking about today is not that. What we're talking about is someone who chooses, and I need you to hear that word, chooses to point out your flaws, your failures, your insecurities, your wounds in a room full of people. At a dinner table, in a group chat, at a family gathering, in front of your colleagues, your friends, your children, or complete strangers. They take something real about you, maybe something you already struggle with, maybe something you've confided in them, maybe something you've been quietly working on, and they hold it up like a mirror in the worst possible light, in the worst possible moment, surrounded by an audience. And then they call it honesty. That is not honesty, that is performance, that is control, that is someone using truth as a tool to establish dominance over you in that room, in that moment. Because think about what public humiliation actually does. It doesn't just hurt you privately, it reshapes how others see you. It shifts the social dynamic. It positions them above you and places you below. And the most insidious part is that it does all of this while appearing reasonable, while appearing brave, even. Because in some twisted social logic, calling someone out publicly gets mistaken for courage. But courage would be pulling you aside. Courage would be having the difficult conversation, quietly, respectfully, with the goal of actually helping you. What they chose to do instead was pick the audience over your dignity. They chose the reaction in the room over the relationship with you. They chose their moment over your humanity. That is a choice that tells you everything you need to know about how they see you. Now, here is where it gets psychologically deep, because some people will read this and say, but what if it was true? What if what they said was accurate? And this is exactly the trap. This is exactly the thought pattern that keeps people forgiving what should never be forgiven. The truth of the content does not justify the method of delivery. Read that again. A doctor can tell you that you have a serious illness. That's hard to hear. But the doctor doesn't drag you into the waiting room full of strangers, point at your chart, and announce your condition to everyone present while watching for your reaction. The information might be identical, but the delivery is where the humanity lives. The delivery is where the respect lives. And when someone strips that away from you deliberately, they are not giving you honesty. They are giving you honesty as a weapon, and they are aiming it directly at your sense of self. And let's go one level deeper, because there is a pattern with these people. This is never a single incident if you look closely enough. There is always a specific type of moment they choose, always a particular audience they need, always a specific version of you they want to reduce. The confident version, the version people respect, the version that doesn't need them. The public humiliation is never random. It's surgical. It targets the parts of you that stand tallest, and it does so precisely when others are watching, because the goal is not to help you improve. The goal is to make sure you don't outgrow them, to make sure you stay small enough to stay manageable. That is not love. That is not friendship. That is not mentorship. That is psychological possession disguised as brutal honesty. And here is why you should never forgive it, not in the traditional sense that people mean when they say forgive. I'm not talking about releasing the bitterness from your own heart. That work is yours to do for your own peace. What I'm saying is this: you should never excuse it. You should never normalize it. You should never return to close proximity with someone who has shown you clearly and publicly that your dignity is something they are willing to sacrifice for their own moment of power. Because the moment you forgive this and stay, the moment you accept the apology and pretend it didn't reveal something fundamental about who they are, you send a signal, not just to them, to yourself. You teach yourself that your public dignity is negotiable, that people who claim to care about you are allowed to humiliate you as long as they frame it correctly, that your pain is less important than keeping the peace. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to shrink. You start monitoring yourself around them. You become careful. You stop sharing your wins, your ideas, your growth, because some part of you knows that those things will become material. You start to disappear inside your own relationships, which is one of the loneliest feelings a human being can experience. The person who humiliates you publicly is not a flawed person having a bad day. They are someone who made a real-time calculation, the calculation that the audience mattered more than you did, and acted on it without hesitation. That calculation is the truth of who they are, not the apology that came later, not the explanation they offered when they saw how serious you were. The unfiltered, unguarded moment when they chose to use you for social leverage, that is the most honest thing they ever showed you. And you owe it to yourself to believe it. This doesn't mean you walk through life cold. It doesn't mean you build walls so high that no one can ever give you hard feedback again. Growth requires uncomfortable conversations. Strong relationships can hold difficult truths. But you learn to tell the difference between someone who loves you enough to challenge you privately and someone who diminishes you publicly and calls it love. One of them is trying to build you. The other one is trying to own you. Protect your name, protect your dignity, protect your presence in every room you walk into. Because the way people treat you in public is a direct reflection of how much they value you in private. And anyone who is willing to make you feel less than in front of others using truth as the excuse has already answered the most important question you will ever ask about them. The question of whether you are safe with them, and the answer is no. Because people who genuinely respect you never need an audience to be honest with you. They just need you. There is a moment that most people remember but rarely talk about. It's the moment after you've had the conversation, the real one, the one that cost you something. Your pride, your comfort, your fear of being seen as difficult. You sat down with someone, or you spoke up clearly, or you wrote the message you rewrote 10 times before sending. And you said it, you told them what you needed, you explained what was hurting you. You drew the line, and they listened. They nodded. Maybe they even apologized. Maybe they said they understood. Maybe they promised it would be different. And for a little while, it was. And then it wasn't. And here's where most people make the most costly mistake of their lives. They go back and have the same conversation again. They explain again. They clarify again. They give the benefit of the doubt again. Because they believe deeply and genuinely that if they can just find the right words, if they can just make the other person truly understand, something will finally change. But I need you to hear this, and I need you to let it settle somewhere real inside of you. When someone violates a boundary you've already clearly communicated, they are not confused. They are not forgetful. They are not struggling to understand what you meant. They understood you the first time. They heard you. They processed it. And then they made a decision, a quiet, deliberate, conscious decision, that what they wanted mattered more than what you needed. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice. And that distinction changes everything. We live in a culture that is deeply uncomfortable with that idea. Because if we accept that someone who violates our boundaries is making a choice, then we have to accept something painful, that they see us clearly and they're doing it anyway. That feels worse somehow than believing they just didn't understand. Confusion is fixable. A lack of care is something else entirely. So we protect ourselves from that truth by returning to explanation. We go back and try harder. We soften our words. We add more context. We make our needs smaller, more reasonable, easier to accommodate. We shrink the boundary to make it easier to respect. And in doing so, we teach the other person something they will never forget, that our limits are not real limits. They are starting points for negotiation. They are suggestions. They are things we say when we're upset that disappear, when we calm down and come back. And so they come back too, over and over again. Because why wouldn't they? There has never been a real consequence. There has only ever been another conversation. This is the cycle. And the cycle is not happening because you haven't explained yourself well enough. The cycle is happening because the other person has learned through repeated experience that crossing your boundaries costs them nothing permanent. It might cost them a difficult conversation. It might cost them a few days of distance. But ultimately, you return. You soften, you explain again, and everything resets, except your sense of self, which quietly erodes a little more each time. Now let's talk about what a boundary actually is, because I think this word has been so overused that it has lost its weight. A boundary is not a punishment. It is not a power move. It is not something you use to control another person's behavior. A boundary is simply a statement of what you will and will not accept in your own life, in your own space, in your own relationships. It is information, it's a map of where you end and where the relationship begins. And the purpose of communicating a boundary is not to change the other person. It's to be honest about what you need so that both people can make informed decisions about the relationship. When you tell someone what you need and they consistently refuse to honor it, they are making an informed decision. They are looking at the map you gave them and choosing to walk through the boundary anyway, not because they missed it, because they decided they could. And this is where I want to go deeper, because there is something happening psychologically in these repeated violations that most people don't fully recognize in the moment. Every time a boundary is crossed after being clearly stated, two things happen simultaneously. The person crossing it gains power because they've just confirmed that the boundary is not real. And the person whose boundary was crossed loses power, not just in the dynamic, but inside themselves. Because something in your nervous system registers the pattern before your conscious mind will admit it. Something in you starts to understand that what you say doesn't actually determine what happens to you, that your voice doesn't change your reality. And when a person starts to believe, even unconsciously, that their voice doesn't matter, they stop using it, they stop speaking up, they stop asking for what they need. Not because they no longer have needs, but because experience has taught them that expressing those needs leads nowhere. That is how repeated boundary violations don't just damage a relationship. They damage a person. They teach you to be smaller. They teach you to tolerate more than you should. They train you, slowly and systematically, to accept less, until less feels normal. And normal feels like something you should be grateful for. And the people who do this are not always dramatic. They are not always aggressive or visibly cruel. Some of them are charming. Some of them are people you love deeply. Some of them are people who genuinely believe they care about you. But care without respect is not care. Affection without consideration is not affection. You can love someone and still refuse to honor who they are. And when someone shows you repeatedly that your clearly stated needs are not something they are willing to consistently prioritize, they are showing you the ceiling of how much they actually value your presence in their life. And the ceiling is low. So why should you never forgive this? Again, I want to be precise about what that means. Releasing the anger from your own heart, that is always your work to do. Carrying that weight hurts you far more than it hurts anyone else. But forgiving in the sense of returning to the same closeness, the same trust, the same access, that is different, because some things, once revealed, cannot be unfound. Repeated boundary violations after clear communication reveal something that cannot be explained away by stress, or a bad week, or a difficult childhood, or not being loved properly themselves. Those things may be true, they may be real, they may even deserve compassion, but they do not change the data in front of you. The data is this: you told someone what you needed more than once, clearly and honestly, and they chose more than once not to provide it. That data is not a mistake, that data is a pattern. And a pattern is a person showing you who they are in the most reliable way possible, not in their words, not in their apologies, not in the version of themselves they present when things are good, but in their consistent behavior when it costs them something to choose you. When you finally stop forgiving this, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, something remarkable starts to happen. You begin to understand what a real relationship feels like. One where you don't have to repeat yourself. One where your needs aren't a burden to be managed, but a reality to be respected. One where the people around you don't just hear what you say, they actually let it change how they move through the world with you. That kind of relationship exists. But you will never find it while you are busy maintaining one where you constantly have to convince someone that you deserve to be treated the way you've already asked to be treated. Your boundaries are not too much. The right people will not find them exhausting. They will find them clarifying, because people who genuinely respect you don't need a boundary explained twice. They just need to know where it is. There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't have a clean name. It's not the pain of losing someone. It's not the pain of failure or rejection or grief in the traditional sense. It's something quieter and more corrosive than any of those things. It's the pain of realizing that the person you trusted with the most private parts of yourself, your fears, your history, your wounds, your secrets, took everything you handed them in vulnerability and used it against you. That is betrayal. Not the casual kind. Not the kind that happens by accident or carelessness. The deliberate kind. The kind where someone looked at what you gave them in trust, understood exactly what it meant to you, understood exactly how exposed it made you, and chose to use it anyway. For their own benefit, for their own entertainment, for their own power, for whatever they needed in that moment that mattered more to them than you did. And I want to start here because I think most people misidentify what actually makes this specific act so damaging. They think the pain comes from the information being exposed. And yes, that hurts. But that is not the deepest wound. The deepest wound is what it does to your relationship with your own openness, with your own ability to trust, with the part of you that believed, that genuinely, innocently believed, that being real with someone was safe. Because before the betrayal, you made a decision. A conscious, vulnerable, courageous decision to let someone in. You didn't have to do that. You could have kept the wall up. You could have shown them only the polished version, the managed version, the version that needs nothing and fears nothing and carries no history. But you didn't. You chose intimacy. You chose honesty. You chose to believe that this person was worth the risk of being truly known. And they took that gift, that act of trust, and they weaponized it. Now let's be very precise about what weaponizing trust actually looks like, because it doesn't always look like someone announcing your secrets publicly. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's someone using what they know about your insecurities to undermine your confidence in a moment when you need it most. Sometimes it's someone sharing your private struggles with people who had no right to that information, not out of concern for you, but out of a desire to shift how those people see you. Sometimes it's someone using the knowledge of your past to manipulate your present, to make you feel that your history disqualifies you, that your wounds define you, that the things you've been through are weaknesses to be exploited rather than experiences to be respected. Sometimes it looks like a partner who brings up your deepest insecurity during an argument, not to resolve anything, but to win. Someone who knows exactly which words will unravel you and reaches for them deliberately, precisely because they know they'll land. Sometimes it looks like a friend who takes your confession, something you shared in a quiet, honest moment, and turns it into a story they tell at your expense. Who packages your pain as entertainment? Who makes themselves more interesting by making you more exposed? And sometimes it looks like a colleague, a family member, a person you called close, who uses your private information to position themselves better. In a room, in a relationship, in a hierarchy, while you're left standing in the wreckage of your own openness, wondering how you could have been so wrong about someone. All of these are the same act at their core. They are a person saying, without words, that what they could extract from your vulnerability was more valuable to them than the vulnerability itself. More valuable than you. Here is what this does psychologically, and why it matters that you understand this clearly. Human beings are wired for connection, not just socially, neurologically. The ability to share ourselves honestly with others is not a luxury or a personality trait. It is a fundamental human need. When we feel safe enough to be known, truly known, something in us relaxes at a level that nothing else can reach. We become more ourselves, more grounded, more capable. Intimacy, real intimacy, is one of the most powerful sources of psychological strength that exists. Betrayal of that intimacy doesn't just hurt the relationship, it attacks the mechanism itself. It doesn't just make you distrust the person who betrayed you, it makes you distrust the act of trusting. And that is a wound that reaches far beyond the person who caused it. Because now, in every new relationship, in every moment where someone deserves your openness, there is a voice, quiet but persistent, that says, remember what happened last time. Remember what it cost you. Remember that the people who know the most about you have the most power to destroy you. And so you close, not all at once, not dramatically, just gradually, carefully, one small withdrawal at a time. You keep things surface level. You share the version of yourself that is easy to handle and safe to know. You become skilled at the performance of intimacy without the reality of it. You laugh at the right moments. You share enough to seem open. But the real things, the tender things, the things that actually define who you are, those you keep locked away. Because experience taught you that openness is a liability. And the tragedy is that the very thing you're protecting yourself from, isolation, disconnection, being unknown, is exactly what this protective strategy creates. You end up surrounded by people, but deeply alone. And the person who betrayed you isn't even in your life anymore, but they are still shaping it, still determining how much of yourself you're willing to give, still winning. This is why you should never make peace with this act in a way that minimizes what it actually was. Because minimizing it doesn't just let the person off the hook, it lets the wound stay unnamed. And unnamed wounds don't heal. They just go underground, where they quietly run everything. Call it what it was. Someone saw your trust and chose to betray it. Not in a moment of confusion, not accidentally, deliberately, with the full knowledge of what they were doing and what it would cost you. That is not a flaw in their character that deserves your continued compassion and proximity. That is a revelation of their character that deserves your clearest, most permanent response. Some people will tell you that holding firm on this makes you unforgiving. That healthy people forgive betrayal and move on. And here is my response to that. Forgiveness, in the truest sense, is something you do for yourself. It is the process of releasing the grip that someone else's actions have on your inner life. That work is real and it is worth doing. But forgiveness does not require you to hand the same person the same access to your interior world. Forgiveness is not the same as amnesia, and wisdom is not the same as bitterness. Knowing what someone has shown you and responding accordingly is not a failure to heal. It is proof that you have. The people in your life who are worthy of your trust will never make you regret giving it. They will hold what you share with them carefully. They will understand without being told that your vulnerability is not information, it is intimacy. And they will treat it the way intimacy deserves to be treated, with protection, with discretion, with the simple fundamental understanding that what you gave them in trust was given to them, not to the world. Those people exist, and you deserve to fill your life with them. But you will only find them when you stop making excuses for the ones who showed you, clearly, undeniably, deliberately, that they were never that person to begin with. What someone does with your trust tells you everything about their character. And their character, not their apology, not their explanation, not their most charming version of themselves, is the only thing that was ever real. There is a specific kind of confusion that doesn't feel like confusion at first. It feels like your fault. It feels like you misremembered something, like you overreacted, like you were too emotional in that moment, and now you're seeing the whole situation through a distorted lens. It feels like you're the problem, not because anyone sat you down and told you that directly, but because every time you try to talk about what happened, the conversation somehow ends with you apologizing. Every time you bring up something that hurt you, you find yourself defending the fact that it hurt at all. Every time you try to describe what you experienced, the other person paints a picture of events so different from yours that you start to wonder if you were even in the same room. That feeling, that slow creeping uncertainty about your own mind has a name. It's called gaslighting. And it is one of the most psychologically destructive things one human being can do to another. Not because it causes a single moment of sharp pain, but because it causes something far more insidious. It causes you to become a stranger to yourself. Let's start with what it actually is, because the word gets used loosely and I want to be precise. Gaslighting is not someone disagreeing with you. It is not someone having a different perspective on a shared experience. Healthy relationships hold space for two people to remember things differently, to interpret events differently, to feel differently about the same moment. That is normal. That is human. What gaslighting is, at its core, is a pattern of deliberate distortion. It is someone consistently and intentionally rewriting reality in a way that makes you doubt your own perception, your own memory, your own emotional responses, your own sanity. And the word deliberately matters here, because this is not confusion on their part. This is a strategy. Conscious or not, it is a method of control. And it works, not because you are weak, not because you are gullible, not because something is wrong with you, but because it is specifically designed to exploit the most fundamental human need there is. The need to trust your own mind. Think about what it takes to function in the world. Every decision you make, every relationship you navigate, every risk you take, every boundary you draw is built on the assumption that your perceptions are real. That when something happened, it happened. That when you felt something, there was a reason. That your internal experience of the world is a reliable guide to the actual world. Most of us never think about this assumption consciously because we never have to. It operates in the background, silently, like oxygen. You don't notice it until someone starts taking it away. And that is exactly what gaslighting does. Slowly, systematically, it removes your trust in your own perception. And once that trust is gone, once you genuinely start to believe that you can't accurately read what is happening around you, you become dependent. You stop trusting yourself and start outsourcing your reality to the very person who is distorting it. You ask them what happened, you defer to their version of events. You check your responses against their reactions before deciding whether your feelings are valid. And without realizing it, you have handed someone complete control over your interior world. Now let's talk about how this actually unfolds in real life. Because gaslighting rarely announces itself. It doesn't begin dramatically. It begins with small moments that you almost dismiss. You bring up something they said that hurt you. They tell you they never said it. You're almost certain they did, but almost certain isn't certain, and they seem so sure, so calm, so unbothered by your accusation that you start to doubt yourself. Maybe you misheard. Maybe you misunderstood. You let it go. It happens again. A different situation, a different detail, but the same pattern. You describe what happened. They describe something completely different. They tell you that you're remembering it wrong, that you always do this, that you tend to twist things when you're upset. And there it is, that quiet seed of self-doubt planted again, watered with their certainty. Over time, the pattern escalates. Now, it's not just individual memories being questioned. It's your emotional responses. You're too sensitive, you're overreacting, you're paranoid, you're making things up, you're seeing problems that aren't there, you're unstable. And because they've been systematically dismantling your trust in your own perception for months, sometimes years, you have no solid ground left to stand on. You can't say with confidence what you experience because you have been trained to distrust your own experience. You can't defend your emotional responses because you've been taught that your emotional responses are unreliable. You are, in the most literal psychological sense, lost inside your own mind. And here is what I need you to understand about the people who do this. They are not always monsters. They are not always even aware of the full extent of what they're doing. Some of them learned this pattern in environments where controlling the narrative was a survival strategy. Some of them gaslight because facing the truth of their own behavior is something they genuinely cannot do, and distorting your reality is easier than confronting their own. Some of them do it because power over another person's perception gives them a sense of security that nothing else provides, but none of that changes what it does to you. Understanding why someone causes harm does not obligate you to remain in the path of it. Compassion for someone's history does not require you to sacrifice your sanity to it. Because here is what extended exposure to gaslighting actually costs a person. It costs them their decisiveness. People who have been chronically gaslit often describe a paralysis around even small decisions because they have been taught so thoroughly that their judgment is flawed that they no longer trust it. With anything, it costs them their voice. Because speaking up became so consistently painful, so consistently turned against them, that silence began to feel safer. It costs them their sense of identity because who you are is built in large part on your relationship with your own experiences. When those experiences are constantly denied, rewritten, and invalidated, the self that was built on them begins to feel unstable, fictional even. And perhaps most painfully, it costs them their relationships, not just the one with the person who gaslit them, but the ones that come after. Because now, in new relationships, every moment of disagreement carries an echo. Every time someone sees something differently, there is a flash of that old confusion. Am I wrong again? Am I doing it again? Is my perception the problem? And so they either pull away from closeness to protect themselves, or they go to the other extreme, becoming so hypervigilant about their own perceptions that they exhaust both themselves and the people around them. This is the long shadow that gaslighting casts, and it is why making peace with it, normalizing it, explaining it away, forgiving it in the sense of allowing it to continue, is one of the most dangerous things you can do to yourself. Your perception is not perfect. No one's is. You will misremember things. You will sometimes be more emotional than objective. You will occasionally interpret something in a way that doesn't perfectly match what the other person intended. That is called being human. That is not a flaw to be exploited. That is not an opening for someone to systematically dismantle your relationship with reality. The difference between an honest disagreement and gaslighting is not the content of what's said. It's the pattern, it's the consistency, it's the way one person always ends up confused and the other always ends up certain. It's the way one person's reality is always the one that gets revised. It's the way clarity seems to move further away the more you try to reach it. Trust that pattern. Trust it more than you trust the moments of warmth, the apologies, the periods of calm that made you think you'd imagined the whole thing. You didn't imagine it. And the fact that someone worked so hard to convince you that you did is the most telling thing of all. Because people who respect your mind don't try to make you doubt it, they help you trust it more. There are moments in a person's life that don't just test them, they define them. Not the good moments, not the celebrations, the victories, the days when everything is working and the people around you are easy to love. The moments that define you are the ones where everything has come apart, where the weight is unbearable, where you are sitting in the dark, literally or figuratively, and you have nothing left to perform, nothing left to protect, nothing left to offer anyone. You are just a person in pain, raw and unguarded, needing something as simple and as profound as another human being to stay. And someone who claimed to love you looked at that moment, saw it clearly, understood what it was, and chose to leave. Not because they were in danger, not because they had nothing to give, but because your pain was inconvenient, because your lowest moment didn't fit into the version of the relationship they preferred, because being there for you in that specific way would have cost them something. Their comfort, their time, their emotional energy, their carefully managed distance, and they decided quietly and deliberately that you were not worth that cost. That is emotional abandonment. And it is one of the most quietly devastating things a person can experience inside a relationship that is supposed to be safe. I want to be precise about what I mean here, because not every absence is abandonment. People have limits. People have their own struggles. People sometimes genuinely don't have the capacity to show up the way we need them to, and that is a real and human limitation that deserves understanding. There is a difference between someone who cannot be there for you and someone who will not. There is a difference between someone stretched beyond their limits and someone who simply decided that your moment of need was not a priority worth rearranging their life for. The distinction lives in the pattern, and the pattern is this: when things were good, they were present. When you were fun, easy, light, and unburdened, they were engaged. When the relationship required nothing difficult from them, they were warm, attentive, connected. But the moment the relationship required something real, the moment you needed them to sit with you in discomfort, to hold space for your pain, to show up without any reward waiting on the other side, they disappeared. They became unavailable. They changed the subject. They minimized what you were going through. They offered logistics when you needed presence. They sent a text when you needed them in the room. Or they said nothing at all and waited for it to pass. And when it passed, when you had pulled yourself back together, when the crisis had faded and the lightness returned, they came back, as if nothing had happened, as if the absence hadn't spoken volumes, as if you hadn't spent your darkest hours completely alone while they were technically still in your life. Here is what that does to a person over time. And I want you to follow this carefully because it happens so gradually that most people don't see it until they're already deep inside it. The first time it happens, you make an excuse for them. They were busy. They didn't know how serious it was. You probably didn't communicate clearly enough how much you needed them. You tell yourself this because the alternative, that they knew and chose not to show up, is too painful to sit with when you're already in pain. So you protect them from the truth of what they did by absorbing it to yourself. The second time it happens, you feel something shift, a small, quiet withdrawal. Not a conscious decision, more like a reflex. Something in your nervous system begins to learn that this person is not a source of safety when things are hard. But you're still in the relationship, still invested, still hoping that the warmth you feel when things are good is the real version of them, and the absence in your worst moments is the exception. By the third time, you have stopped reaching for them when you're struggling. Not because you've made peace with it, not because you no longer need support, but because you've been trained through repeated experience that reaching for them in those moments leads to a specific kind of pain that is worse than the original pain. The pain of needing someone and finding no one there. The pain of vulnerability met with silence. And so you learn to manage your lowest moments alone. You learn to wait until you're better before you let them see you. You become very skilled at suffering privately. And now something has broken inside the relationship that neither of you may have openly acknowledged. Because from the outside, everything still looks intact. You are still together. You still share good moments. You still function as whatever you are to each other. But you have quietly, permanently rearranged the architecture of your inner world to exclude them from the parts that matter most. You are now alone inside a relationship. And that is one of the most exhausting, disorienting, and lonely places a human being can inhabit. Now let's go deeper. Because I think it's important to understand why this specific act, deliberate emotional abandonment during your lowest moments, is so psychologically harmful in a way that outlasts the relationship itself. Human beings do not just need connection in general. We need what psychologists call a secure base. We need to know, not hope, not assume, but actually know that there are people in our lives who will be present when we are at our most vulnerable. That knowledge is not just emotionally comforting, it is psychologically foundational. It is what allows a person to take risks, to be open, to move through the world with a basic sense of safety. When that secure base is reliable, people function better in every area of their lives. They are more resilient, more emotionally regulated, more capable of intimacy, creativity, courage. When that secure base is consistently absent, when the person who is supposed to be your safe place repeatedly fails to show up at the moments you need them most, something fundamental gets disrupted. You stop believing that safety is available to you, not just in that relationship, but as a concept. The message your nervous system receives over and over is this: when you are at your lowest, you are on your own. And a person who has internalized that message moves through the world differently. They become hyper self sufficient in a way that looks like strength, but is actually armor. They become uncomfortable receiving care even when it's genuinely offered, because care has been so unreliable that it now feels dangerous to depend on. They manage their vulnerability so tightly that even people who would have stayed, people who were genuinely safe, never get close enough to prove it. This is the inheritance of being emotionally abandoned by someone who claimed to love you. It doesn't just hurt you in that relationship, it shapes how you show up in every relationship that follows. It teaches you to be alone even when you're not. And this is precisely why you should never minimize this act. Never explain it away as them being emotionally unavailable in general, or not good at this sort of thing, or dealing with their own stuff. All of those things may be true. But none of them change the fact that you needed someone, they knew it, and they chose their comfort over your crisis. That choice reveals the actual terms of the relationship, not the terms they expressed in the good moments, the terms they demonstrated when the relationship required something real. Love that only shows up in the easy moments is not love. It is enjoyment. It is convenience. It is someone benefiting from who you are when you are light and easy to be around, which costs them nothing. The actual test of whether someone loves you is not how they treat you when you're at your best. It is how they treat you when you are at your worst, when you have nothing to offer, when there is no reward for staying, when being present requires genuine sacrifice. The people who stay in those moments, who sit with you in the dark without needing it to be over quickly, without needing you to perform recovery for their comfort, without needing anything from you except the chance to be what you need, those people are rare. And they are irreplaceable. And you will only recognize them if you stop filling that space with people who have already shown you, more than once, that they will not be there when it counts. You deserved someone who stayed, you still do. And the moment you stop excusing the ones who left is the moment you create space for the ones who never will.